Hi, hey everyone, and welcome to Found Friday, our weekly hangout where we talk about topics of interest for marketing and SEO. I'm your host, Karen Skates, and with me today are Aaron O'Brien, our COO, and Ray Griesluber, our CEO and founder. Sorry, Ray, I just demoted you.
I thought
Karen's having a rough Friday.
Can we just start over? Good to have both of you guys here today.
Good to be.
To continue our discussions around some current topics of interest for marketers, today we're talking about the skills and level of technical savvy that future marketers will need. So when people think of the evolution of marketing, I think they start out thinking of the Mad Men sort of era, where marketers are sitting around a conference table, brainstorming creative ideas born of some gut intuition, having some bourbon, and today that same person is seen more in a technical role, using tools and data to inform strategic marketing decisions. So how do you see those two views merging in today's marketer?
Well, the bourbon part's still the same, at least here.
Totally.
That's never going to change. Yeah, I mean, I think that it's changed completely. Actually, interestingly enough, at the end of the Mad Men series, they were starting to hint at them making that change, where they were buying these large computers and they were building whole new divisions around the data and technical analysis side of things. So even back, in the early '70s, this was something that was happening. So it's obviously been a huge change. I think that it would be impossible today to present yourself as a legitimate marketing manager without some sort of technical knowledge and knowledge of what's going on. The question of how much you want to go in one direction or you should go in one direction versus the other, that I think is always going to be dependent on some fundamental limits that each individual has. If you could basically, if you're going to design the perfect university major for like the marketing technologist, it'd be a really interesting major actually, but or even like a marketing manager with a very strong technology focus, I think you would just run into some certain limitations around people who are just geared one way or another. I think you're just inevitably going to see a need for certain people doing more of the technology side and certain people doing more of the intuitive marketing stuff. But I think that both types of people need to be able to communicate with each other, and so for a quote-unquote non-technical marketing manager, I think they need to understand and appreciate the role that data plays and understand how data-driven decisions are made. And there's nothing that prevents someone who doesn't necessarily know how to build technology from being able to understand data. So that's probably actually one additional distinction to make, because you've got pure kind of like what we think of as a more intuitive-based marketing, the creative side of it, the technical side of it, which is the ability to lead technical teams or build things, and then there's like the data science and the math and the statistics and analytics and everything else. And I think those are different skill sets that some people possess more of in certain combinations, and others people they have maybe one or two more or less of the other in different cases. So
I think there's also like a really weird it's shifted a lot kind of worldwide, but I think a lot of it started in Silicon Valley, and we talked about this a lot when you and I first met, which is as technology became a bigger part of society, and technology and advancements have kind of bled into almost every facet of life, whether you like it or market it or not, there was this emphasis placed on engineering and people who build things and a technology focus, and a lot of credence given to that. And somewhere along the way, people in kind of a more marketing or communications field, I think, started to be thought of like anybody could do that job.
right.
Anyone could be a marketer. And that's a difficult thing for people who take marketing to that better level, the same way that you would not want someone to say that anyone could have built your product, anyone could have built that app, anyone could do this, right? And nobody really has that feeling. Although it would be interesting, because now, I was going to say, now that there's so much computer science going on in schools, maybe in 15 or 20 years, it would be possible, right? That like a lot more people could have done something like that. I think when we're talking about like this marketing technologist role, one of the things that makes me a little bit nervous is that people will start to add this distinction to their title or this distinction to their capabilities because they think it is a marketable marketing feature, and they'll say it without really knowing what it means. And it's kind of the same thing that happened when social media started to really roll out. People started being like, oh, I'm a social media expert. And I'm like, by the very fact that you said that, I'm going to go ahead and say no. So like calling yourself, like a social media expert, or, like a Twitter expert or a marketing technologist as a way to market yourself worries me a little bit in like what it might lead to in terms of like now what'll happen is people might have a bad experience with someone who has claimed such a thing, and then they might say, well, based on what I experienced, I don't actually need that role here. Like we don't need that at this company. And like maybe you do, maybe you just didn't have the right person because like they misrepresented themselves. So I think there's maybe a lot to go in terms of qualifications for what marketing technology really means and how you get certified on certain stuff. Like Salesforce has certification levels and stuff like that. So maybe some other places, like maybe there's a better way.
That's interesting, actually. Yeah, that could be a whole other conversation. Actually, is if you were to build a curriculum or a certification around this, what would that look like, and how would you actually validate that people have that set of capabilities?
The problem with most things like that is that a lot of times by the time somebody develops a curriculum, the core components of it have changed, which is why so many colleges have so much trouble dealing with exactly this, right? Like they're trying to teach content marketing, they're trying to teach social media, they're trying to do these things, but by the time they actually write a curriculum and create any materials around it, I mean, even though you could do all like online text stuff, like instead of having to buy physical books, which take a lot longer to produce, like new channels have come out, and the way that people were using the channels previously has completely changed.
Yep.
So it's almost more of a, you need to have like a case study type of a class and type of a role, and you need to have people who have these jobs like really come be guest lecturers in the evening, and they just need to be kind of teaching off the cuff a little bit.
Yep.
As like more of a seminar class, I think would be the only way to keep it real time.
It's interesting because I was reading this Roundup article not too long ago, and they're talking about who will be the new marketer. Where will that person come from?
Oh, God, I know where this is going, and I'm already upset.
And some of the people said that they thought the new marketer is going to come from the technical side.
They said IT. Do not try to sugarcoat it because you know it makes me angry. We got in a fight about this morning. Ray, you follow me on this train of thought right here. When people say IT, do you think that like if you took what somebody thinks of as an IT person, that person is going to be doing your marketing tomorrow? I mean, it means you either A, don't know what marketing is, or B, don't know what IT is. Because I'm really concerned that somebody feels that way.
Yeah.
And the conversation
IT.
The word gives me the whole idea just gives me the shivers.
Oh man, I went off this morning about it. But I think that one of the points that I had made with regard to the matter is that IT is a really big word and can have a lot of different meanings, and a lot of people may mean it really differently when they say it, similar to marketing, right? And I feel like a decent correlation for people is if you work in medicine, there are tons of jobs in that. There's like technicians, there's pharmacists, there's nurses, there's doctors, and within each one of those fields, there's a million specializations. Like your doctor could be like a pediatrician or an orthopedic surgeon or like, an ENT, ear, nose, and throat doctor. Like these are all really different things, and you need them at different points.
Yep.
Same thing with marketing. Somebody is not just marketing and all of marketing, right? Same with IT. You're not just IT and all of IT. Yes, there are generalists who do take on those roles, similar at Ginzometrics when, we started out and it was just me doing the marketing, right? But that is not, even then, I don't know everything about everything, even if I'm just trying to handle little bits and pieces of all of it. So I think when a survey comes out and says that next generation of marketers will come from IT, I'm really nervous because I'm concerned that people don't know either what their job is or what IT's job is, and you shouldn't have said it if you didn't know what it meant.
Yeah, I mean, gee, that just it unravels entire. It basically is more revealing in the sense that it does exactly what you which is it shows how little people understand about this entire set of industry, both industries actually. The idea that I mean, yeah, that's a whole other conversation. Like,
Yeah.
if I was going to describe, what IT means to someone who actually comes from a technical background, even they would laugh at the idea of that person becoming a marketer,
I
unless they
think
just had no appreciation whatsoever of what marketing was.
I
Which,
think what they're thinking is that because there's so many tools and everything out there, and it is more technical, that future marketers are going to have to be so technical that the whole understanding marketing is going to be secondary, which I find a little absurd.
well, I mean, so understanding marketing can't be secondary if you're a marketer because it doesn't make just being technical doesn't mean that you're good at marketing. Just knowing how to code code something doesn't mean you're good at marketing.
Well,
Um,
it's just like knowing how to write doesn't make you a journalist.
yeah,
Similar situation. It's also weird to me that somebody would think that knowing how to build something and knowing how to use it are the same thing. Like I honest to God, like know engineers, and this is a really normal thing, so it's not a knock on engineers. Same thing goes for marketers. I know engineers who don't actually know how to use the thing that they've built,
yeah,
right, to like accomplish its end goal. But I
yeah,
also know marketers like me. I market a software product. It doesn't mean I know how to build software. Like
yeah,
these are not inextricably linked situations and hopefully never will be.
yeah, yeah. Well, okay, so I mean that does bring us back to the question of those. What does marketing look like for the future? Because I think we're basically saying that technology is going to continue and it's going to do its thing, and every technologist has their own area of expertise, and they have to be able to specialize to one degree or another, and the degree to which they're able to do that, they're going to be more successful at interfacing with business people, and that'll probably be good for their career. But on the flip side, if we are talking about marketing technologists and saying that the CMO does need to become much more technologically savvy, which I agree with that statement, and I'm guessing you guys do, but we can talk about that. What does that mean then, going forward for
Well,
marketers?
that was one of the questions, right, Karen? Which
Right.
is like if you have a chief marketing technologist, which people have been pointing to in multiple articles recently, do you still have a CMO? Do they have different functions, different roles within the organization? Do they have to work together? Like, what does that even look like?
Yeah, so I think that I would I personally think that having a CMO does not obviate the need for a marketing technologist and vice versa. I don't think that just because you have a marketing technologist, you don't need a CMO anymore. I think that the challenge for CMOs and people with that background is to understand what technology trends are happening, how they're going to have an impact on their business, what they need to understand, and more importantly, who they need to hire and how they need to interact with those people. Not necessarily every CMO going out and learning how to become a programmer.
Well, how much technical ability do marketers actually need in the future? Will the tools being developed for marketers become so user-friendly with seamless UI that marketers will not really need the technical expertise to use them? They'll just be simpler to use.
Dude, you're about to get like another epic rant, which is like
You're right.
this is the you cannot say like how much technological experience do marketers need because there's a million kinds of marketers.
Yeah.
Like marketers have different roles, and when you get these really large organizations, like I'll take Adobe for example, because I did work with an agency that handled part of their business inside of so back then Adobe had like 4 or 5 different agencies handling their business. Our agency handled 4 different pieces of business within our own agency, and those people didn't even talk to each other. Like they would come over for meetings individually, but we never had like an all Adobe meeting where everybody that worked for Adobe came and hung out and had one big meeting because these people worked in different business units and had different things. And so it's like one group of people would work like within different products. So like let's say there's a really big difference obviously between Adobe Creative Suite and Adobe Enterprise Platform, right? So those are just 2 different pieces of the 4. Within that, sometimes what you would work on, like let's say for Adobe Enterprise Platform stuff, we would be handling email marketing. and maybe PR or something. But for Adobe Creative Suite, maybe we were handling ad development and like user outreach and support, right? But then other agencies would handle other completely different things. Depending on what you're doing, it really makes a huge difference as to not just how much technical acumen, but what type of technical acumen you need, because there's a big difference between knowing Salesforce and Marketo and then having like a lot of information about, like, let's say Facebook's ad network. Like, these are really different technologies, but it's all technology.
Yep. Agreed.
Do you think that marketing will ever get too technical and that we'll need to rely on a different group to do the creative work?
Oh man, I feel really strongly about this. Like, that one of the things I see as being tragic is people who work in large organizations. I think sometimes what happens is you kind of get funneled into a field, and then if you end up more on like the data and analysis and technology side, you don't get to be creative as much anymore sometimes, and so you're not part of those like more fun big brainstorm meetings. And if you are, you're kind of there to shoot holes in stuff and be like, oh, well, we shouldn't do that because like I have data that says you shouldn't. And I think that that hurts everyone to some degree, right? I'm not saying that you can be necessarily both the leader of like a creative team and the leader of the technology team successfully, and that there are people, like Ray mentioned in the beginning, right, who have an affinity for one or the other, right? So like your team likely has affinities for something, but I think when you pit two people or like two groups against each other, one which is like data and analysis and things like that, they're always going to be able to poke holes in anything, because as we've always said, you can make numbers say whatever you want them to say at the end of the day. But like that team's always going to be kind of like the rain on your parade situation. And then the creative team is always going to be trying to like bust through and push the envelope. But if they don't know about the data or why what's happening is happening, they might not make the best choices, right? So I think that everybody needs a little bit of a healthy respect for that, because if we're calling all of those teams marketing, that the idea of like the right marketing curriculum would mean that everybody would have at least a baseline, like cursory knowledge of all of these things. And so even if it's not your wheelhouse and doesn't become your forte, you at least know it and have some appreciation for it.
This actually, I just had, I was just reminded of a similar situation. So if you guys remember the SOPA conversation that went on about a year or two ago in Congress, where they were debating how much more government intrusion into privacy they want to allow. And basically, it's an ongoing conversation, but this was SOPA as a particular big debate that turned to big because of the way a lot of internet companies responded. One of the things that struck me about that whole conversation was you had all these Congress members talking about these large social issues, and it became pretty apparent during a lot of these conversations that none of them understood anything about technology at all. And so they were like, well, we should do this, and we should mandate this and dictate that, and people who had a more technical background would raise these objections and say, you don't really understand what you're saying, because if you did that, you could defeat it, with A, B, and C, and so forth. And so, it's that's kind of like those Congress people are kind of like the old school marketing people who, or even what we're talking about now, where we're talking about if there is going to be a division between quote unquote marketing people and technical people, the risk is that you have people who, number one, don't understand what they're talking about in the first place. Number two, basically, when the Congress people's response to you don't understand what you're talking about was, oh, okay, sounds like we need to go back to the drawing board and get our nerds involved. And so, what that reveals is it's unfortunate in the sense that it shows that they not only don't have that understanding, as they have no appreciation for that understanding. And so, from us who are we're generally more technically savvy, I think any one of us would look at that and say, wow, you're the one who actually looks much more outdated and out of touch with what's going on. And so I think that would be a risk for any sort of like non-technical business person to try to relegate the data side of things, the technical side of things, back to a team that does that, and basically keep those roles too separate.
I think there's such a interesting thing that happens, actually, a good example of what you were just saying that I always see get resurfaced. And it's funny because my husband and I were talking about this just a day or two ago, is that people not understanding like how things really work is, you know, those like posts on Facebook where it's like Facebook can no longer use my such and such, and everybody thinks that if you copy and paste this thing and like post it into your Facebook stream that like it's going to help you somehow. But it's like if you actually go in and read the nature of a social network is if I take a picture and I post it on Facebook and I say you can't do anything with this, they can't put it on other people's walls. Other people can't like it and share it on theirs. So it's like you're essentially saying, well, I just want my own thing. And I'm like, well, then why don't you just keep them in your phone if like nobody's actually allowed to see it? So that goes to the lack of fundamental understanding of why Facebook needs the ability to share your information and needs the rights that you see in that disclaimer that everybody rails against. It's like, well, without it, it's not a social network. It's just going to be where you store pictures for your own private use.
Yep.
You know, and I think that there's a really interesting kind of continuation of people wanting to understand what's going on and trying to learn certain things and getting misinformation. And there's a lot of misinformation out there for folks that maybe confuses people or scares people a little bit, and then that kind of turns them off. And that's bad because there's a lot of taking advantage of people's lack of knowledge about certain situations, and that causes a ton of harm. And I don't know necessarily how to regulate that thing other than to call people out individually for what they're doing, which often results in a bloodbath as well.
Yep.
But one of the things, you know, I was talking to Karen about this the other day, is I think it's really great to work at a startup, and one of the things that's really great about it is it gives you this like really broad picture and end-to-end view of how a lot of things work together, even if you don't necessarily understand that like every single piece of things that work together, you know, or like how to do that person's job. You get a better idea of how all the jobs actually go together and how all the systems need to operate together, and that's something that, you know, most people who work in really big organizations never have because it would cause too much chaos, right? You know, like example is here you and I have kind of like the full picture view, but that doesn't mean that everybody else like knows what's going on with support or what's going on with development or what's going on with customers or what's going on with like email sends or whatever. And if they had to know, they would, one, be as crazy as you and I are, and two, they wouldn't be able to get anything done because you're too busy focusing on everything. So when you get these really huge organizations, there are people who, like, I'll use email marketing as an example because people think of it as like being a little bit more archaic now, and it's been around as a marketing discipline for a lot longer, is people will build emails, write emails, and do these things, but they don't, at the end of like whatever the content that they're sharing is, or sending out, like the landing page or wherever it's going, they may not have anything to do with that landing page anymore, right? So like, the buck literally stops once they hit send in terms of gathering data about the email itself and like whether or not people clicked, but the information and the knowledge about the piece of content that they were trying to drive traffic to stays completely a mystery to them. Like they never get that information. And I'm like, well, how crappy is that?
Totally.
You know, when we talk about where does the buck stop, if we have a CMO and a CTO, Chief Technology Officer, Chief Marketing Technologist, or whatever.
Oh, those are two very different things. Chief Technology Officer and Chief Marketing Technology person, two very different things.
So let me clarify. Sorry, I misspoke. If you have a Chief Marketing Officer and a Chief Marketing Technologist, how do you separate the responsibilities of the results of the marketing efforts? Like how do you do that?
I personally think that if you're talking about measuring the success of a company's ability to execute on marketing initiatives, that has to roll up to the CMO. I think that the CMO needs to be responsible for that. I would have the chief marketing, I don't even know if chief marketing technologist is the role that should exist. If it does, then that's like probably depends a lot on the company, but I do think that there is a role for marketing technologists for sure. But I would say in most cases, organizationally speaking, that should roll up to the CMO as well. But that person the CMO in turn needs to be able to understand exactly what that person is supposed to contribute and have a deep appreciation for what those contributions are.
I agree with you that it would be really hard to have both roles in one organization, although there has been a lot of conversation about it, and I think that the conversation is saying that in some organizations you would need a CMTO instead of a CMO, and then I'm like, well, then what you really just need is a CMO that understands the technologies that you use. Because like the way that I see it is you have a potentially like have a CMO, and everybody has a different C-level suite and whatever it is. You have a CMO and you have a CTO, right? And you have sometimes you have a CSO or whatever.
Yep.
And at some point, it's somebody's job to understand the strategic value of how you position things, how you market, how you take products and understand them, how you gather feedback and decide to some degree what to build. And that's where the CMO and the CPO, Chief Product Officer, talk, or whoever is responsible for product development,
Yep.
Need to interact. And then you have all of these technologies and integrations that you own, and trying to decide what technologies to use, how to use them, and how to integrate them into your organization may be the combined conversation between all C-level suite members, right? But owned maybe by a CTO, or in some places a CIO, like a Chief Information Officer, depending on how your organization is set up. But every organization has like such a different such a different set of what these things mean, and a different mixture of C-level suite officers that I feel like there has to be a buck that stops somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. I've actually this conversation prompted me to search for the growing C-suite, because it occurred to me that we're getting a lot of C titles, and there's let's forward this article over to you later. Maybe we can post on the links too for the show, but there's an article on Fast Company that talks about the 10 C-suite jobs of the future, and they're basically titles like Chief Ecosystem Officer,
What?
Chief User Experience Officer, Chief Automation Officer, this one's good, Chief Freelance Relationship Officer.
Nope, negative. I hope this is parody. I hope this is like an Onion article.
It should be. It should be.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
I like that. What was the one, Chief?
Hold on.
Freelance Relations Officer?
Yeah, Chief Freelance Relationship Officer.
Ecosystem Officer. Ecosystem Officer.
Yeah.
Is that ecosystem like HR, or ecosystem like your technology? Like all of your parts that are combining?
It's like your industry ecosystem, your supply chains, all the different relationships that you have. It's like more of a business ecosystem.
I think at the end of the day, my opinion is I don't care what you call it. I think that for everything that's happening inside your organization, however it works best for your particular company and your employees, the buck needs to stop with someone, and that person needs to be capable of talking to other people within the organization. I think it's ridiculous to expect any person at any title or responsibility level in the organization to understand at a deep level everything, right? Like the CMO is probably not going to be a Facebook ad expert, a Twitter expert, an email marketing expert, like a ad development expert. Like they should know how to talk to all of those people, and at a strategic level help provide guidance and direction for the organization based on what they're seeing and based on like what else is going on. But I mean, trying to add more C-level titles because there is more technology, or there are more people, or there are more roles, is just going to be crazy. You can't have like 18 C-level people. It's hard enough with like 4 or 5.
Yeah, totally.
So just to play devil's advocate, I'm going to ask a question that's kind of counter to even what we're doing, but are there times when marketers might be better served by not using data?
Yeah, so I think that there's a couple that I would point to. The first is when whatever data you have is not based on your users or your industry. So like, but it's like that was based on like maybe somebody in the healthcare industry using ads on Pinterest, and it's like, well, it doesn't have the same target audience as me, and it's not the same industry as me. So like if that's the only data point that there is available right now, then and I'm like early, like when Pinterest was new, like, oh, well, you know, Pinterest is still really new and there's not enough data to be conclusive, so I'm not going to not do it just because this one industry didn't have a good experience. So I would still say that that's not a good one. And then the other time is when, you know, there is data, like maybe kind of spurious data, but not a lot of data on something. I think that having no data is not a reason to not do something. That's always a little scary to me, because it prevents a lot of growth and new adoption. I think a lot of times companies are waiting when a new social channel gets released or a new marketing methodology gets released. They're waiting to see how other people use it or like what happens. And I'm like, sometimes you need to be what happens. Like, just go do it.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I think it's also important to say what we mean when we say, are there times when a marketer should not rely on data or not rely on technology? Because data and technology are two different things. So they're kind of two different questions. Unless you're talking about, you know, a marketer that is going to reach people entirely through like local farmers markets, then maybe you know, you're going to need technology at some point. So you're going to have to understand what that looks like. But I would say data, you know, to Aaron's point, comes from different sources. There's industry data. I think that anyone who's building a marketing plan today should be very aware of the data in their industry. So I think they've got to rely on that. If you're talking about building a new product, if you're working at a startup, you're not going to have user data anyway. So, you know, it's going to be your job to figure out what type of data you need to create in order to make decisions going forward. So that becomes more of a creative question around what you're going to need going forward, what tools you're going to need, what data processes you're going to need. So I think that there are times where the intuitive strengths that marketers bring are really important and more important than just relying on pure data alone. And I think that there are times where you need to be able to use both, you know, use your intuition, but also make good decisions around data.
Well, yeah, and I think that people make this assumption that marketing somehow used to be purely intuitive and now it's purely technical. Where even in the Mad Men era, right, it was based on something. You made a hypothesis based on something. You knew something.
Yep.
And then you'd go out and you'd test it out, and then you'd kind of see what the reaction is. And so it was still using a scientific method, right? It wasn't just like what they show on TV, sitting around drinking a bottle, getting drunk, and going, let's do that. So I think there's still the same mindset. It's just there's some different tools and some different ways to get to that information now, better ways to get to that information.
Yeah.
Well, this is how everybody keeps getting themselves into issues, and why so many people are like kind of freaking out and concerned is there's now so much information, so many data points, like so much stuff that can be gained across like not just your own efforts, but competitors, industry, all these different things. And so many ways to approach it and visualize it. Like, it's actually what the panel I'm speaking on at PubCon next week is about. It's about data visualization. And, you know, we here talk about kind of the, you know, method, medium, and message a lot in terms of a data viewing idea to really hone in on like what's working and what's not working. But I think that what's dangerous right now, and the reason that people are starting to give so much credence to these people who have technological acumen, is because it seems a lot of times like they're the only people that can actually take this information, turn it into insights, and then help turn it into action, right? And so if you don't know how to read the data or access the data, then you don't know how to turn any of that information into insights to do things better. So now we're like praying to the gods of analytics, and that's how like that's become a thing. And so that's, I think, why we say, when people say marketers need to be from IT or like marketers need more technology, what we're talking about is marketers need better access and understanding of the information about how what marketing tactics they're using are working and how to make smarter decisions based on that information.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we actually have gone over time today. This has been a good talk with you guys. We welcome viewers' comments and questions at Karen@ginzametrics.com or Aaron@ginzametrics.com. You can join the conversation on Twitter at #FoundFriday. And if you're going to be at PubCon next week, be sure to catch Aaron, who will be presenting in a panel discussion about data-driven marketing, and that's happening Thursday at 1:30. And then, of course, we'll see you here next Friday, same time, same channel.
All right. See you guys later.
Bye.